We live in a 3D world, and a new renaissance of stereoscopic cinematography is attempting to bring that world to life on screen. With stereoscopic filmmaking comes an entirely new set of creative techniques, rules, and editing practices. Media Composer now includes a powerful integrated stereoscopic workflow, and in the videos that follow, you'll see how to take advantage of it. But let's begin by taking a look at how our eyes work in stereo. When a human observer looks at a scene, her two eyes focus and converge on a specific point in that scene. This point of convergence can change repeatedly as she examines various objects in the scene. The result is two separate images of the surrounding world. Since human eyes are on average 65 millimeters apart, a distance referred to as the interocular distance, each eye sees the world from a slightly different perspective. Parts of the scene that are hidden from the vantage point of one eye are visible to the other. This hiding of objects from one eye is referred to as occlusion. Collectively, these differences in perspective and occlusion between the two eyes are called disparity. Now, when the human brain takes in the left and right eye views, it can use the disparity between them to fuse the two images into one and reconstruct a three-dimensional representation of the world. Of course, this isn't the only way we arrive at a sense of depth in our world. The natural perspective lines visible to a single eye are enough to give our brains a good estimation of the distance of objects. In fact, beyond about 200 feet, the differences between what the left and right eyes see is so slight that our brains judge depth for distance objects solely on perspective.
Two rules of 3D inside Maya. So here we've got a pair of eyes, this grey box is a screen, and the two cubes are just the two different stereo images. So one of the main things when doing stereo is to take into account the distance between these two images, and this usually happens when looking at something really close or really far away. So we have something really far away, and the person watching the film has to look at that, so like something in the distance. As you can see, that's diverged the eyes, so the eyes have gone parallel, and even worse, they can go past parallel, which means it's putting strain on the muscles in the eyes, because this isn't a really natural pose, and this will cause nausea and headaches, and it won't be able to view the picture. And another way this can happen is if an image gets too close up. As you can see, the eyes start to cross over. Now, crossing over the eyes isn't so bad because you can deal with that in nature. When you look at things close up, they usually cross over a little bit. So it's fine to do this, but keeping something that close for quite a while or coming in and out can put strain on the eyes, so it's not good to keep something popping out at a constant. Now, another thing is if something's in distance and moving in and out, so coming closer to the viewer fast, this can be alright, but after a while this can put strain on the eyes as well, because they're having to quickly adjust between distances. Okay, so another area is if something comes close to the edge of the screen. Now, if something comes close to the edge of the screen, something's going to be cut off from the left eye that will be visible in the right eye. So when your brain tries to fuse those images together, one of the images has a bit of information missing because that's past the edge of the screen. Now, this can be stressful on the eyes because they can't really figure out what to do with the image, but this isn't always as bad because you'll have some background images, background elements, like you'll have the walls, the floor going to the edge. The main thing to keep into account is anything that's the viewer has to look at. So if there's a character or there's an object that they have to focus on that's part of the story, keep it inside the boundary of the screen. Try not to divert the eyes to the edge. So just keep most of the motion inside the screen. Now, they're just some basic rules. Obviously you can mess about with them. Some things like crossing the eyes you can get away with, but it's a good practice to get used to them and try avoid doing that because that'll break some of the 3D effects. So in the next lesson we're going to go through actually adding a stereo cam and some of the ways like the separation of the images. So
perspective. Bringing all of this to 3D filmmaking, you might be tempted to reproduce what happens with our eyes using film cameras instead. Of course, like most things, the reality isn't quite that simple. Firstly, it's extremely difficult to get two cameras with their bulky chassis 65 millimeters apart. A common solution is to use a beam splitter with one of the cameras at 90 degrees to the other. This can introduce various artifacts such as color tinting from the deflecting mirror and spatial misalignment. Other systems use two lenses in a single camera chassis, although this creates its own significant constraints on the cinematographer. To mimic the human eye, you might then choose to converge your camera lenses on an object in the scene.
Alright, then
This is sometimes called towing in.
So this is a parallel camera setup, and this is towed in. A fine thing about parallel setups is that you can define the convergence in post. For that, you just move your left and right eye horizontally together or more apart. With this method, you are defining where the zero plane will be. Another advantage of a parallel setup is that the audience can look everywhere in the picture and have a good stereo impression. That's a bit different in a towed-in setup. The only disadvantage is the cropping you have to do for every shot. But this gives you also the freedom of choosing the convergence in post. On a towed-in setup, the convergence has to be decided on set, so you can't adjust the convergence in post. Without modifications in post, you also have a convergence point only in the center, because your cameras are twisted toward this point. It's like squinting all the time, and your audience will only have a good stereo impression when looking to that specific point. This is also because the images aren't matching exactly. You've got keystoning and depth plane curvature. Let me show you what this is. If you are looking on a checkerboard and use a parallel setup, you'll get this. All fields are lined up nicely and your brain can match left and right view easily. But when you are looking through a towed-in setup, you'll get this. When you overlay your two camera views, they will match up in the center. But the closer you get to the edge of the screen, the more distortion you will have. This is called keystoning and gives you a depth plane curvature, because there's a height offset that gets larger to the edge of the screen.
The cameras.
So to fix this,
the problem with this approach is that it introduces keystone distortion in each of the resulting images. Because each camera is viewing the scene at an angle, the resulting 2D images are skewed. Trying to combine the image as is will produce major mismatches and audience headaches. Now that's not to say you can't shoot like this, plenty of stereographers do, but the resulting images will need to be corrected with a corner pin in post. The generally preferred method for shooting 3D is to shoot parallel. Your cameras are positioned close and alongside each other, just like they were for the tow-in method, but this time they're angled parallel to each other. That way they capture the same perspective shifts that the human eye would, but without the keystone problem. In post, we can slide the two images together until a certain object in the scene overlaps exactly in both the left and right eye images. This is called adjusting the convergence. Now, when we view the image in stereo, anything in the scene that was forward of the object we converged on appears to come out of the screen and into the audience, called negative space, while anything behind the object recedes behind the screen. The object itself is positioned exactly at the theater's screen plane. What's great about this is that the convergence point can be adjusted for any given shot to place scene objects in the appropriate theater space. Media Composer includes tools for quickly adjusting convergence and for scaling up to eliminate
Sony is
any
developing
border
a
crop
360-degree
introduced by the
stereoscopic video display that doesn't need 3D glasses. In the Ginza Sony building, the company exhibited a development prototype to the general public. This cylindrical display enables a stereoscopic image to be seen from any direction through 360 degrees, without wearing 3D glasses. Last year, Sony exhibited a still picture display of this type. This is the first In other words, the display shows pictures from 360 viewpoints, differing by 1 degree each simultaneously. Because several people can view the display at once, it could be used in personal communication tools in the home, such as 3D photo frames and video phones, as well as digital signage and events.
Of course, there's a whole lot more to consider when shooting and editing 3D but by now you should have a grasp of some of the basic principles behind stereo vision and 3D cinema.